So welcome to the second half of the evening. Welcome if you're watching on YouTube. My topic this evening is the life of the Buddha. And there's much to say. I'm trying to give a brief biography of the Buddha, covering everything that is essential, but no doubt I will leave out many important aspects of the Buddha's life. So I would recommend that you read up on his life in one of the excellent books, perhaps Vishwapani's Gautama Buddha, for example. Anyway, the Buddha to be was born Siddhartha Gautama in probably 563 before Common Era in Lumbini in modern Nepal, and he died probably in 483 BCE in Kusinara, which is in modern Uttar Pradesh. How do we know those dates? Well, I think we don't know exactly, but I think historians can make quite good guesses, mainly based on Emperor Asoka's pillars. Asoka lived about 150, 200 years after the Buddha's death. He was an emperor of the Mauryan dynasty. He conquered lots of area for the empire. And after a particularly gory battle, where he looked over the battlefield, saw all the dead bodies, the blood, the people taken into captivity, I guess he had a moment of remorse. And so he converted to Buddhism, and he erected these pillars, a number of them depicting important events in the Buddha's life. So using the information on those pillars, historians, archaeologists have been able to, give something of an estimate of when the Buddha lived. The Buddha to be, his father was Shuddhodana, who was termed Raja, but he was really an elected governor of the Shakyan Republic, which was a vassal state of the kingdom of Kosala. His mother was Maya, who died just a few days after Siddhartha's birth. And according to the custom of that time, the Raja then married his mother's younger sister, Prajapati, who effectively brought Siddhartha up. The family belonged to the Katya warrior caste, which was the leading caste of the time. There were probably around 180,000 Shakyans, of whom 10,000 were Katyas, and it were the Katyas who were able to elect the governor. So it was a sort of a democracy of the elite, a bit like ancient Athens or Rome before the Caesars. Siddhartha would have got the best possible education of the time. So he learned how to govern, and he learned various sporting, physical skills. He would have learned riding, chariot driving, archery, fencing, wrestling, elephant handling. He was probably illiterate, as were almost everyone. There weren't any books, so reading and writing was the area of the accountants. It was only useful for keeping books, as it were. Siddhartha was said to be a reflexive, sensitive teenager and then a young man. and apparently not very good at these physical sports. At 16, he was married to Yashodhara, his cousin, and they lived in the Raja's palace, and he would have spent his time in political activities and farming. The Shakyans were basically farmers. And then just sometimes before his 29th year, he had this experience that is now called the Four Sights. So he saw an ill person, an old person, a corpse being carried to the charnel grounds, and a wandering mendicant. The scriptures suggest that, you know, he'd never seen these things before. Well, that's unlikely. It's more likely that, and we probably all have had this experience, an everyday thing, we see something over and over, and then just at some moment, we really see it. We really see and understand the significance. And so I suspect that's what happened to Siddhartha. He suddenly had a kind of epiphany about the human condition. Sort of existential questions arose in his mind about, you know, was it possible to overcome human suffering? Was salvation possible? And perhaps seeing that wandering mendicant, kind of serene, perhaps calmly walking in the marketplace, that wandering mendicant seemed to be perhaps the person who had found a solution to human suffering. So in his mind arose thoughts about taking up that life of a wanderer. And then the morning after his son was born, he did actually leave home. These wandering mendicants and holy men were very common, and still are actually. The country was rather prosperous at that time, so those wanderers were able to get food begging, and there had been a sort of religious liberation movement as a reaction to the Vedic sacrificial religion that had become rather degenerate and formalistic. And this reaction took various forms. By the 6th century BCE, this movement was quite strong, and people took up different routes, if you like. Some people became followers of the Upanishads, some people became materialists, others self-mortifiers, and yet others wandering mendicants. So Siddhartha took up this life as a wandering mendicant. He looked for teachers, and he found 2 teachers. He studied under one and then under the other, and those teachers taught him meditation attainments and Upanishadic ideas. With both teachers, in a way, he learned what they already had learned, like matched their attainments, and realized that this wasn't the solution to his existential issue. So he then took up self-mortification, and he had 5 companions. So they would have been naked in all weathers. The climate of northern India is harsh. It can be very, very hot and can be quite cold. It snows sometimes. So they would have been outside naked all through the seasons. They would have let their hair and nails grow long. and they would have been starving themselves. And the scriptures suggest that in the end, the Buddha to be only ate 1 grain of rice a day. That's probably an exaggeration. But in any case, he became very emaciated. And then one day he just collapsed. And as he was lying there, he thought he was going to die, and yet he hadn't found the solution to suffering. And then he accepted some food, and at that point his companions left him. And so I'm speculating here, but he must have felt some despair, wondering what to do. So the 2 ways that he thought that he might have got to liberation had not worked. So what to do next? So I guess in sort of in that state of despair, he simply sat down under a tree that we now know as the Bodhi tree, and decided he was not going to get up until he had achieved enlightenment. And indeed, he did achieve enlightenment. The enlightenment unfolded over the period of night, 9 hours of the night. And then afterwards, well, the scriptures have different suggestions for this. Some texts suggest that he stayed around the tree in that area for 7 days. Other texts suggest even 5 weeks. The sort of topmost emotion at that time in him was gratitude. And he wanted to pass what he had learned, first of all, to his 2 old teachers. He realized that they had died. So he then thought of his 5 companions, and he found them in Sarnath, in the deer park, Isipatana. Sarnath is near Varanasi on the Ganges. And he taught his first discourse to these 5 companions. He taught about the middle way and the 4 noble truths. And a couple of days later, he taught the non-self discourse. And all his 5 companions became enlightened as well. So they were his first disciples. And then, now the Buddha spent the next 45 years wandering around northern India, teaching whoever wanted to hear. He ordained followers who were willing to take up the homeless life, and he also accepted lay followers. Those lay followers came from all sections of society. There were kings amongst his lay followers, as well as casteless people. So the casteless ones would have been, I guess, equivalent to the untouchables. The caste system at that time was not quite as invidious as it became later, but still the caste barriers would have been very rigid. But in the Buddha's Sangha, all his disciples were equal. And in around 523 BCE, women were also ordained. So the Buddha lived to the age of 80, which is pretty amazing given the lifestyle that he had lived for the 51 years since leaving home. So you would have lived outside in all weathers, probably often drinking water that maybe wasn't so clean, and eating contaminated food. Dysentery was very common amongst the wanderers. In the last 10 years of his life, he was often ill, apparently, and in lots of pain. Some historians have speculated that he probably suffered from a slit disc. Anyway, in the end, as I said, in 483, probably, he died of dysentery. He died under 2 sal trees in Kusinara. Kusinara was in the Mallas country. It was a poor place, a back of beyond sort of place. And his disciples that were with him, in fact, found it quite difficult to find enough wood for his funeral pyre. And the cremation was delayed for 7 days while his disciples, being confused, were wondering what kind of ceremony they would want to have for the Buddha. Anyway, in the end, he was cremated, and then there was a rather undignified dispute over the ashes. I think the Mallas, because he died in their country, thought the ashes were theirs, but others wanted their share as well. In the end, the ashes were divided into 8 parts. The Mallas kept one part, and the other parts were carried off by different people to different parts. There's a kind of sad little story about the Buddha's ashes, or one lot of the Buddha's ashes. One of these British amateur archaeologists found an urn containing one lot of the Buddha's ashes, and because he was interested in the urn, so he threw away the ashes and kept the urn. He probably didn't realize what he was doing. Anyway, from that rather humble beginning, a tradition has sprung up, a tradition that has touched millions of lives over the centuries, is still touching many lives today, and has probably touched your life too, as you are here listening to the biography of the Buddha.